Hello and welcome to the Federation for Children with Special Needs CPAC Summer School. Today we are in session 5 and talking about meeting the needs of your CPAC membership. So welcome everyone. We're using family engagement as the framework for our CPAC Summer School, and we've been working on the first element, building positive relationships, and within this framework are several goals. The first goal, intentionally building and sustaining relationships with families, are what the first couple of sessions of CPAC Summer School have been all about. We've been talking about creating that welcoming environment, developing a set of shared values among your members, really looking to create an inclusive and diverse membership, and building those strong community relationships that will help sustain the CPAC going forward. So now let's start working on goal number 2, which is all about building reciprocal and balanced communication with not only the families in your community, but with your school district. And I think the first place to start is to know, what do your families need to really build that relationship, to start having a good communication experience with your members, is to really know what their needs are. And we suggest that you ask them, ask the families, what are their preferred ways of communicating with your organization? What platforms are they on? How best to reach them? And where could they go to access information? So creating that reciprocal way of getting input and giving output to your families. One of the tools that you can use is a needs assessment. It's helpful when you, as your CPAC starts to make decisions, you decide your limited resource allocation, and a way to really determine the kinds of assistance that your families in your community need. It really helps you identify your priorities. But I'd like to take a little switch as to how we see surveying families could happen in your community. So today I hope you will learn how to develop and use needs assessments. You'll start to look at different ways to invite perspectives, the power of stories, and how to receive honest and use honest feedback. Once you have information, how do you share it with the district? And then use that to develop resources to meet the needs of your families. That's a little bit about what today is all about. So one of the ways, this is just the nitty-gritty of how to do it, the logistics of conducting a needs assessment, is to work with your district to develop a plan. They're the ones that have access to all of the contact information for the families on IEPs or 504s or families that are involved in the preschool or early intervention in your community. And then choose a target audience. It might be a subsection of any one of those communities that I've just talked about, or it could be all of the students in your whole school community. So really just sit down with your district, talk about what's effective for them and for your CPAC in terms of a plan for creating a needs assessment. And then I think you should sit down and define your objectives so that you're targeting your survey questions, your needs assessments questions to reach your purpose, to help you get the information that you need. I also think that you should sit down and create an introduction before you even start to look at questions as to why this survey matters. Give people a reason why they should participate and the importance and how you're going to use that information. I think that's all key to having a successful assessment. You need to choose what platform you're going to use. There's lots of things online. What's most accessible to families, maybe a platform that's easily able to be translated into other languages, and then create those questions. And we suggest that you sit down with your district and have them as part of the planning process and developing those questions. Where can you come together to get the information that you both need and can use, and come to some kind of an agreement around the questions. By involving your district in the beginning, then you're not bringing them a kind of a set, you know, defined survey that you're asking them to just push out onto their communication channels. I think for them to get some buy-in, you need to involve them in the development of the questions. You're going to disseminate this assessment, collect the data, but I think you need to also set a time period for responses that will meet the needs of the families. It's a period where it's not too short, not too long, but just right, so that you can get the most responses in a given time period. You're going to summarize and reflect on all of this data, maybe develop visuals to share some of that data. And this is where also working with your district to maybe create a joint presentation, because ultimately you're going to want to present this to the decision makers in your community, or use it internally for the CPAC, but often you want to share that information. So knowing that's coming as a joint operation with support from the district. That way, when you bring it to the superintendent or the school committee, it'll carry a little bit more weight, and it'll be addressed a little differently. You might share this information through a presentation or a written report. And I think the best thing to think about is that as a result of surveying people, getting information, having the data, it may define some need areas, and how can you create an action plan to define the steps that are needed ultimately to reach a goal that you have. Going back to that purpose of what was the purpose for this survey or assessment. I think one of the hardest things is to write survey questions. This is a whole science in itself. It's not my strength area, and it may not be a strength area of your CPAC. So you may need some assistance in writing these survey questions. Once again, identify the purpose or what topics might be covered, so you have a structure for your assessment. You need to decide whether you're going to have closed or open-ended questions. If the question itself is a closed question with a list of 3 to 5 choices, you need to determine the number of those choices, and always remember, know that the way that you list the responses might influence the way people respond. I think people are sometimes quick to check off the first box and move on in the survey. So just be aware of that as you create your questions. Determine the number of questions. Don't make it too long that it's not accessible for families, or it's too long to translate. I think it's very difficult to create an unbiased question with using neutral wording. And that's why I think you should share your draft with other people so they can give you some feedback as to how they thought that question was worded, or whether there are any better ways of saying the same thing. I hope that you use clear and specific questions so that you make it easy for the respondent to answer your questions. Your questions in this survey should flow a little bit, group by topic, be in some kind of logical order. Make it easy for the people to answer your survey. And that's why short, clear, concise is all good. And one other thing you need to determine is whether you'll allow this to be answered anonymously. That's one option. It might protect some people who want to remain anonymous, but you might also want to have an option for people to include their name. You could also state in your survey that you as a CPAC are interested in knowing who is responding, but that you'll reserve that information from the final report. So just the answers will go forward. So that's something to talk about and deal with as you create this needs assessment. So one of the reasons why I was suggesting that you start with a needs assessment, and this might be because you're a new CPAC board, you're new leaders, you're just restarting your CPAC, or you haven't done this in a long time. I know many CPACs do this on an annual basis, but your CPAC may not have done it for a while, is that you really want to create a culture where you're listening to their concerns, understanding their priorities, and listening to their needs, rather than you surveying them as to what issues that they have, where they're in disagreement with the process, is asking them, what do they need? Where can you help them? Where can you provide more information and resources? What types of presentations would help them as they learn to advocate for their child, as they learn the special education system, as they learn to navigate all of these documents and meetings. It's very difficult, especially for new families. So I think it's important that CPACs listen. And a needs assessment is one way that you ask for information and you start to listen. You can also do this more informally. You can have a set of questions and have conversations, focus groups. You can do interviews. You can have a listening session and advertise it as such. There's lots of ways to bring information into your group. A lot of times that CPAC will use their support group to get more information and protect people's, provide some level of confidentiality if it's done in a group setting. So just so you realize that there's lots of ways of doing this other than a formal written needs assessment, because your goal really is the same. It's to create activities, resources, information that reflects the members' needs and interests. One of the issues I think that comes up all the time is as you're making a presentation to, say, a school committee, is they're going to ask how many people responded. So you really need to think about what would be a successful representative sample for your CPAC, depending on the number of people that you're surveying. I think any information that comes forward is good, but just be cautious that a low number might indicate to the decision-making body that people either were not interested in what the CPAC is doing or not interested in the questions. So that's part of this process here, is to develop a robust methodology so that you can get the most responses possible, but also be very transparent as to how many people responded and the percentage of your population. It's part of the information, and it's part of the way they will consider the responses that you received. One of the other areas that I think is so important that CPACs need to think about is the value of stories, and how important that is in telling and talking about issues within your community. Stories really carry the day. They have that personal perspective. They hold people's attention, and they trigger those feelings that you want to carry. You want to make this a living, breathing experience for what families are going through and what their needs and concerns are. We use it at the Federation when we do fundraising, because we just want people to connect to us, to understand how we're helping families and what it means to them. It's really a great way to influence people, and you can present all these wonderful data charts and pie graphs, et cetera, and numbers, but what really people will remember and carry home is that story that you told. So that's more of a type of information and data that you're not going to get probably in a needs assessment, unless you have a box on the bottom that talks about other and says share your concerns. But I think you should start to develop stories and capture stories that you can share in different platforms. A needs assessment might also help give you that more honest and objective description of the needs that families want, or their concerns that they might not tell you publicly. So having this kind of vehicle, this tool, might give you more information and some more honest feedback of even what's working within the CPAC and what's not. You also might become aware of some possible needs that you never saw or you never even visualized. So that I think it's a good process, and to do at least on an annual or maybe biannual basis, so that you're getting regular information, you're updating that, and you're getting a pulse on how your work is affecting your community. I think Sometimes though, you do get some results from your needs assessment that you didn't plan for. And I know a lot of CPACs were putting out surveys and needs assessments and thinking that they're going to highlight all of the areas of problems or concerns in a district, and found out that a lot of families are very happy with the services that their students are receiving. So just be ready for different kinds of results, and be open to the interpreting the information that you receive in a really open and transparent and honest way. One of the ways that I think is most effective is for CPACs to take the information that they receive and present it to their advisory body, which is the school committee. So in many ways you can do that. You can have just a written report. You can make an oral presentation. I think most CPACs today use some type of a PowerPoint presentation, so that there's a structured way of conducting the oral testimony or information, and then there's something to take home, that they have a report with the PowerPoint slides. But you can do it in informal meetings. You can create a video if you're so talented in your community. I just think that it's difficult to share this kind of information on social media because of the structure of social media. It's smaller, it's sound bites, unless you link to the report. This is another way to share the information, but it's hard for people to have a complete understanding in some of the social media platforms. I just grabbed this off the internet, that Medford had done a quick survey around the experience of families in COVID times, and had a nice presentation and talked about not only who they sent it to, but the numbers who responded. So it's just a nice way to share information with your decision-making bodies. And during the presentation, Westford CPAC shared their written summary and PowerPoint presentation of their annual needs assessment. So those are the links to those two. If anyone needs these as a hot link, just send me an email and I'll get those to you. I think one of the issues is sharing difficult information, that the result of your needs assessment might show a concern that families have either the lack of services or services that are not working for students. And so it really comes forward as more of a systemic issue. And how do you bring that forward to create that a change, that to move the needle forward in a sense of addressing those types of issues. So number one is you look at your data and see what it's telling you. And if you see that concern, be prepared, get it all together, talk about it, kind of figure out how you're going to address that. I also think that you shouldn't surprise people in a public meeting or in a formal meeting without sharing that information with them in advance, so that they have time to digest it, maybe ask some questions, so that they can formulate some type of response, and they're aware of it going forward. I think you have a better discussion, a better kind of analysis happening when people aren't surprised with information. I think you got to be honest and tell the truth. Here's what the data says. Here's the way we interpret it, allow the school districts to interpret it, but knowing that it's going to be maybe a difficult conversation. And I think you just have to be clear and precise about what you're presenting and what you think it means. I also think you need to give them time and space for a response. And don't make your recommendations maybe in advance, is allow the decision-making bodies to maybe come back, and they might have a more robust way of addressing it than you ever imagined. So you have to give them that openness and that space to be able to respond. You can come back, you can bring forward some recommendations at another time, but I think you need to hear that response first, and you then take it in and kind of sift through it and see how this is going to work. But I think ultimately your goal is to make a plan to move it forward. How are you going to address this? How are we going to talk about it? What more information do we need? Is there some other way that we can kind of work together to address this need, this concern, and have a plan. And it might take some time, and that's okay too. Just knowing that you're working together, I think is the most effective way a CPAC can work with their school district. From that needs assessment, I also hope that you'll use it to think about the information and resources that families are asking for, and use that in part of your planning. Before you set up a whole year's worth of presentations, what do the families want? What do they need? What are they looking for? So that it's driven by information and data. How are you offering information? And hopefully through this survey, you'll find out, what type of language fits the family's preference. So you'll know what your translation needs are, and you can communicate that to the district. And then what's the communication channel that's working and is most effective for them? We're moving into different platforms and different spaces, and I know virtual presentations have worked very well for CPACs. Many are starting to use texting to communicate with their families. So just really start to use these needs assessments to determine these, so that you are meeting the needs of your members and communicating effectively with them on platforms that they're most comfortable with and where they're at. These are a couple of websites where they have resources for you to learn a little bit more about conducting a needs assessment or surveys, and an article by the Pew Research organization about writing survey questions. It's a little long, but I think it's good about helping you identify some of the concerns about writing questions, because it is a very difficult process. Once again, any questions, please email me at the Federation, and I'm happy to answer your questions. This is session 5, and we're halfway through CPAC Summer School, and hope to see you for session 6. Thank you.